Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Kindly settle down. Before some of our guests are still enjoying their refreshments, I'll take maybe 1 or 2 minutes more. So by the time they can come and settle down. And very, very good evening to each one of you, and all the viewers watching the program live. Very warm welcome to you, and thank you for joining. And as usual, if you have any questions, numbers flashed on your screen. You can send all your questions, and the distinguished speakers are agreed to respond to all your questions. Only I request you, please, the question should be relevant to the topic which is being discussed today. And today the theme is very relevant because Trump 2.0 and what it means to India. Because even if you are jointly doing it, the Peninsula Foundation and the Policy Matters and the Conrad thing. But what is very surprising, the timing of this event cannot be more significant and more appropriate than what's happening when our Prime Minister is visiting USA. At the moment, talking to Mr. Trump, and we are discussing what is going to be happening. And the dialogue underscores the critical way of innovation, entrepreneurship, exchange in terms of immigration. Everything is getting covered out. And many a time we always hear about this India, the cusp of transformation, so much of opportunity, and the Trump 2.0 serves as a platform to deliberate in how the business leaders, innovators, change makers can do that. And I'm quite sure today's discussion will bring forth insight on navigating uncertainties and scaling the new heights and fostering cultural excellence. We have a very, very outstanding panel today, and we have a person who has seen it all in person for the last 3 decades in USA, worked with a number of governments, a number of government officials, and travel around the thing. We'll be shortly seeing his profile, which will clearly tell you how lucky we are today to have him with us this evening. Ladies and gentlemen, put your hand together to welcome Mr. Gopal Ratnam, the speaker for this evening. And along with him, we have Air Marshal Matheswaran, AVSM, Ph.D. and retired, and Mr. Kumar. May I request you, gentlemen, to please take your place on the dais. A very warm round of applause for the speakers for this evening. I also welcome warmly the members from Peninsula Foundation, also Policy Matters, and other invitees who have been invited this evening. Good to have you with us this evening, and it's always a pleasure to have you. And this is a topic I know it's very quite elated. Otherwise, normally we have about 150 people attend this. I'm sure more people will be joining us. Maybe Trump, they come a little late because the subject is going to be hot and live for next few days more. Are many of them tuned into television, watching it now, but nothing like listening to a gentleman who has really seen all this in the USA, and plus other 2 gentlemen also work very closely, one in industry, other one in armed forces. And the format of the event is, after I finish my thing, I will hand it over to Mr. Kumar. He will set the context initially, then thereafter he will lead the conversation with the other 2 speakers, and the speaker for the evening, Gopal Ratnam, will share insights for about 25 minutes, followed by, it will be a free-flowing conversation amongst them. While you have any questions, the question slips are available here. We'll hand over the thing, and you can send the questions to all of us, and the speakers have kindly agreed to respond to all your questions. Once again, very warm welcome to all the viewers watching the program live from all our channels, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and also our webinar, and also radio, MMA radio. We're watching it live. Just listen to that. And I'm quite sure you should be a great listener, great reader, because I read a nice book today, and it says the power of laziness is that you become so lazy if you don't read it. And you will really get killed when you retire. You don't know what to do. That time, all the time in the world, but you can't read because you don't have a mind to read it. That's why they say you must develop the habit of reading. I'm not here to give a lecture today. Let the gentleman speak for what's going to happen. But start reading, start listening to the people, attend the events. It will really, really continue your thought process. Let me have the privilege of introducing the distinguished speakers for this evening. May I have you, please.
Air Marshal N. Matheswaran, AVSM, BM, Ph.D, retired, is a decorated Indian Air Force veteran with 39 years of service as a fighter pilot, experimental test pilot, and defense strategist. He retired as Deputy Chief of Integrated Defense Staff, specializing in policy, R&D, and space strategy. A soldier scholar, he holds a Ph.D. in Defense and Strategic Studies and is a senior fellow from Harvard's Kennedy School. Air Marshal Matheswaran is the chairman and president of the Peninsula Foundation, a public policy think tank, and a strategic consultant for aerospace and defense industries. Mr. Gopal Ratnam is a Washington, D.C. based journalist with nearly 30 years of experience covering U.S. national security, foreign affairs, and tech policy. A senior staff writer at CQ Roll Call, Mr. Gopal reported on key issues such as the U.S. defense industry, international arms trade, and emerging technology regulations. Mr. Gopal's work has been featured in prominent publications like The Washington Post and Foreign Policy, and he is a 2023 Hamrick Boel Foundation Fellow for Transatlantic Media. Mr. K Kumar, former partner and board member at Deloitte, India, has over 37 years of experience in management consulting, specializing in strategy, operations, and supply chain transformation. Mr. Kumar led assignments for large entities, particularly in the automotive, process industries, and consumer business. A thought leader in manufacturing and innovation, Mr. Kumar has authored key reports and served on industry committees, including FICCI and the American Chamber of Commerce in India.
Ladies and gentlemen, big round of applause to our distinguished panel. Very, very high profile, and I'm quite sure you would have listened to so many channels and so many news already in the television, but it will be something different and new and thought-provoking. Now I request Mr. Kumar to please set the context and take it forward. Mr. Kumar.
Thank you, Group Captain. Ladies and gentlemen, very good evening. I'll take maybe 2-3 minutes to lay out a few things in front of you so that we know what we are trying to achieve in the evening. And then we will have, as Group Captain said, Gopal speak for about 20-25 minutes. He has some prepared remarks. And then between Air Marshal and myself, we will have a conversation with them. But before we jump into it, I thought I'd say a few things which would really set the context. Fareed Zakaria, a week or a couple of weeks back, said the new Trump presidency has been breathtaking. Indeed, it has been. You wake up every day and you read the tweets or the executive orders or the announcement that come out of it. Each one has been remarkably more compelling and never seen before kind of things that truly shake the world as we know it today. Right from wanting to buy back Greenland, buy back Panama Canal, making Canada into the 51st state, to the tariffs, to the citizenship rights, and pulling out of the Paris Accord and ICC and WHO. We have not seen anything so intensely happening in such a short time ever in our lives. Yeah, we're building a Riviera in Gaza. So there you go. So it's just been intense. And the question that all of us have as executives, as investors, is when is this going to stop? Is this the initial bloodletting of the victor, which will play out for a few months, and we'll go back to the world that we used to know in the past? Or is this what we are going to see for the next 3 or 4 years? I think that's the kind of question I thought we should really have some perspectives on. And I hope, Gopal, you're going to cover some of that today. From my standpoint, why is this so important for us to have perspectives on? One, from an economic standpoint, and the second is, of course, the geopolitical standpoint. The first, if you take the economics, we all know that the United States accounts for 25% of the world's GDP. And today it accounts for 75% of the market capitalization. And less than 10 years ago, the market capitalization of the United States capital markets used to be about 50%. In the last less than 10 years, I would argue it's about 6-7 years, that shot through the roof to 75%. If you take within that 75%, about 10 companies would account for half of that market capitalization. So that is 0.5 multiplied by 0.75. So that's a significant amount of capital lying in the hands of few people. And the fact that some of them are standing next to President Trump in his inauguration is a very significant. It's not just a photo op, but it can fundamentally change the way in which trade, commerce, industry operates and so forth. So, therefore it becomes important to understand what's happening, not at a broad level, but even at the level of those 8, 9, 10 companies. I don't know if many of you watched Vice President Vance's yesterday, a day before in Paris. He was saying things that Mark Zuckerberg would have loved to say. Therefore, clearly there seems to be a lot of proximity between the administration and the big businesses. And he started by saying, I really want to work for the small business and not for the oligarchs, but actually said things which any of the oligarchs would have loved to hear. All of this, in my view, results in a couple of things. One, it unsettles investors in terms of their decision making to invest capital. Clearly, for the foreseeable future, no sensible investor is going to make commitment to where he or she is going to situate a supply chain, because you situate it in a particular place and one swoop of a pen, you are going to find that completely unviable. And in the context of India, you will find that for the last 4 or 5 years, we have been seeing that our GDP growth has been actually pulled back by lack of private investment. And these things are not going to help in unleashing the animal spirits and unleashing private investors into going into the market and making investments. So that is a significant issue that we have to deal with as we go along. The second issue economically is the uncertainty is vacuum cleaning the capital out of markets like India. All of us know this. The FIIs have been pulling out capital hand over fist for the last so many months. And as an investor, you wake up in the middle of the night in cold sweat and wonder if we have actually hit the bottom or we still have pain to deal with in the next 2-3 months, or is it going to be 6-7 months? We don't know. So, taking out capital from our market into safe haven, which today is only the United States because it's, that's the home of the dollar, is an issue that we have to worry about. And consequently, all currencies are getting hammered. We have lost so much of INR value in the last 3-4 months, and people are still, was it yesterday, day before, KV Krishnamurthy was saying in a television interview, rupee may be overvalued to the extent of 9% even today. Are we going to hit that 9% in 2-3 months, or are we going to have our usual 3-3.5% depreciation every year over the next 3 or 4 years? The very thought of having a crash of 8-9% in a short period of time is really frightening. If that were to happen, and a lot of us, thanks to what happens in the United States, our budget calculations just go for a toss. I mean, our ability to manage the fiscal balances is going to be put under severe pressure. So these are things that I think are relevant, and therefore for us to understand how long is this bloodletting going to happen. And by the way, again, going back to what Vice President Vance said about the AI industry, if some of what he said were to be implemented by the Trump administration, what is the role for other countries in terms of participating in the platform development and partnering with the United States? He said, this is what we want to do. You guys accept what or agree with what we are doing, you can partner with us. If you don't agree with us, we are going to come after you. I mean, that's pretty much what he said. He actually wagged his fingers at a bunch of EU leaders sitting on the dais in Paris. If that were to be the attitude, what happens to our tech industry as we know it today, which essentially serves the American markets? Was it yesterday, day before? ET was showing a graphic that 58% of Infosys revenues come from the United States. The lowest is about 42% of one of the companies. If they are going to be hit with such uncertainty, then what happens to our pride and joy, namely the tech industry? So that is one part of the equation. I'm going to very briefly touch on the geopolitical part because we have a much better expert than me sitting on the dais. For a long time, combination of economic might and soft power and the military power made the United States some sort of a policeman of the world. And the rate at which they want to withdraw away from the multilateral institutions, and by the way, almost all of the multilateral institutions were founded and grown by the Americans, and they want to pull out of Paris Accord. And based on the Paris Accord, every country has made investments in green energy. And if the founder is moving away, what happens to the future of green energy as we have planned for that? And what happens to WHO without the biggest funder? And the next pandemic, all of us agree WHO is not very effective during the COVID days, but that is the only global institution we have with reference to health. So withdrawing from global institutions and withdrawing from being the force for good, in a sense, and keeping some sort of a calm in the world is a frightening thought. In fact, if he is pulling out of NATO and he is going to make all the NATO countries invest in defense, they are going to take dollars that they would otherwise put in social welfare, health, and other things into defense. And that's possibly true for India also. If we are not going to have a calming influence and we have aggressive neighbors in our neighborhood, are we going to push up our defense spending? And that's not the money that is easily available. We have to dip into education, health, and so forth. So, and by the way, will that also embolden some of the regional powers into acting out their fantasies? Will China think, look, Americans are withdrawing, therefore is it time for me to rename more towns in Arunachal Pradesh or think about getting into Taiwan and so forth? So that's again a very frightful thought. So I thought I would say these things. I'm probably, being a little more dramatic than what is warranted. But I think in the worst case scenario, this is really what we are dealing with. And I'm happy that we have Gopal with us who can throw some light on what are the forces that operate within the US that allow President Trump to play out what he is threatening to do, or are there institutions and the domestic politics that can come in the way of him playing out his fantasies and so forth. So that's something that hopefully we'll get to hear from Gopal. And then, like Group Captain said, we will have a conversation at the end of it. Let me not take any more time. I'll now turn it over to Gopal, and you can speak from here or you can use the lectern. Gopal? Yeah, that's it.
Thank you. Thank you, Kumar. This is a great opportunity that Kumar, who is a friend of mine and a classmate of mine from Bharatidasan Institute of Management, suggested that because I'm here in India at this point in time, this may be a good opportunity to come and speak about this topic. Thank you to Group Captain Vijay Kumar for this invitation. And thank you for this opportunity to speak before the Madras Management Association. I'm also honored to share the podium with Air Marshal Matheswaran. I wanted, just before I begin, I wanted to make a small little change in the bio. I used to be a full-time journalist working for this publication, Congressional Quarterly, and roll call, but because of family circumstances, we are forced to be here in India for a few more months, so I've decided to, step away from a full-time engagement into a freelance writing position. So I no longer work for that publication. What I hope to do in the next few minutes is to sort of present, do three things. One, help explain the domestic political context in the United States and how, if everything works well, then some of the things that we are seeing Donald Trump do can potentially be constrained, and they can act as a brake on his impulses. And then I want to take a little bit of time to kind of, help understand and explain the topic of this evening, which is what does Trump 2.0 mean for India and the world? And then I want to briefly touch upon why Trump is engaging in what appears to be this extensive act of destruction, and like Kumar pointed out, withdrawing from global institutions, and even, weakening America's institutions, which, the fact that the United States participates in the global institutions and the fact that the American institutions have worked in a certain way, those are the real strengths of the United States. So we can talk a little bit about why Trump is engaging in these acts. But before I get there, obviously there's one big caveat, which is a lot could change in Washington, given how volatile the last 1 month has been. And some of what I'm about to say could potentially change or become irrelevant, even by the time this event has concluded. So maybe you all have to keep checking your phones to see what's the latest outrage from Trump. So now Donald Trump is in the White House, and he's acting basically not like a president who has been elected to continue the work of the US government, but like a conquering king, right? A medieval king who has conquered from a neighboring country or a neighboring region, and he's wielding these executive orders like a sword. He is out to destroy the institutions, and he's just basically vanquishing, pillaging, looting, setting fires to what he sees in Washington. And there's a reason why the American people appear to be supporting what he's doing, and I'll get to that later in my remarks. And unlike any other president in American history, he also has a sidekick, an enabler called Elon Musk, who claims he is rooting out corruption and waste, but basically helped by an army of 20-year-old kids who have just gotten out of college and getting into all the US government agencies. Although the headlines are terrifying, but the actual record of what is actually happening in Washington seems a little bit less dramatic. But one shouldn't take that as a definitive trend, because it could actually get a lot worse. And I'll get to that point as well a little later. So here's a quick overview of all the things Trump has done in the last 1 month. He has signed a flurry of what is called executive orders. And executive orders don't have the weight of law in the US constitutional context. And typically what happens is they get challenged in court, and courts can dismiss it, or a next president can come and just negate whatever executive orders have been issued by the previous president. So Trump has done both. He has basically rolled back executive orders issued by Biden and issued some of his own. One of the things he did was to withhold federal financial assistance amounting to about $3 trillion out of an annual budget of $10 trillion. So a whole bunch of states sued, and a federal court said, well, you can't stop spending on these programs. But at the same time, a Republican Party to which Donald Trump belongs, the politicians in the party also realized that withholding federal assistance, for example, for programs that help pay for a subsidized health insurance program, could hurt Republican voters. So the White House changed its direction and they withdrew that order. Then Trump, as I think is become, this is one of the most forwarded items that I see on WhatsApp, he ordered an end to birthright citizenship. And now this is something that affects a lot of immigrant families, and so that's gotten a lot of attention. But a birthright citizenship cannot be revoked by a president, because that is a right that is guaranteed by the US Constitution as part of what is called the 14th Amendment, which was passed in the aftermath of the Civil War in the 1860s. And the only exception in that is for children born to foreign diplomats, because because foreign diplomats are not subject to the jurisdiction of the United States government. So their children cannot automatically become citizens of the United States. And the process for amending a constitution is very elaborate. 2/3 of the states have to meet and ratify changes to the constitution. So courts have basically stopped that as well. And Trump threatened that on the day one, he will impose tariffs on Mexico and Canada, and then delayed them both after both countries said, okay, fine, we'll do what you want. We'll stop the flow of migrants. We'll stop the flow of drugs. These are not brand new steps. Both countries have been doing that, but both countries made it look like this is something they were doing because Trump was asking for it and he was appeased. So he has delayed the imposition of tariffs on those two countries. And then he ordered cuts of about $4 billion to the National Institutes of Health, which in the US is actually a significant and is one of the cornerstone of American health. And it has pioneered research in a variety of biomedical and healthcare sciences that have led to dramatic advances, including, for example, in the context of COVID, the development of an mRNA vaccine was actually financed by the National Institutes of Health. So cutting down, a budget of the National Institutes of Health could potentially have far-reaching consequences, not only to the US, but to the rest of the world. So that also has been stopped by courts. But Trump and his people have had success in other areas. For example, they have managed to pretty much close down the USAID, the US Agency for International Development. They have laid off about 75,000 government employees and are shutting down diversity programs across the US government. Now, can Trump do all of this? Well, he technically cannot, because things that have been done by the United States Congress, which is, for example, the creation of the US AID, is something that Congress created. So only Congress can actually change it. But because a lot of the Republicans hold both houses of Congress, the lower house is called the House of Representatives, the upper house is called the Senate. And because they have majority in both, they are afraid of Trump. So the members of Congress are not exercising their constitutional authority. So then the question is, was Trump really elected to do this? Did the people give him a mandate to do all of these? A mandate is usually judged by, how much of a vote a person got in an election. And as all of you know, the American election system is very different from anywhere else in the world. There is the winner is not decided by a popular vote count, but it's something called an electoral college. But even just going by the popular vote tally, Trump won about 49.3% of 49.8% of the popular votes, whereas Kamala Harris got 48.3%. So he didn't really he got a plurality of the votes, but not a majority. So he didn't get more than 50%. And in all the opinion polls during the election, voters said they chose Trump because he promised to address inflation, economy, and concerns around that, because voters said that was their biggest concern. And Trump repeatedly told people and audience in his rallies that he would tackle inflation on, quote, day one. Now, it's been nearly a month, and he has done almost nothing to address inflation, which in fact is actually growing. This year, the consumer price index rose 3% in January from 1 year ago, which is the largest increase since 2023. So whatever Trump has been doing, taking office, issuing all these orders, banning birthright citizenship, firing federal workers, none of it appears to be actually addressing the concerns that voters chose him to address. Now, then the question is, can he get away with this? How long can he continue to do this? Does he really, or will anybody stop him from doing this? There is actually one sort of a natural mechanism which is likely to put the brakes on Trump, because in the lower house, the House of Representatives, the Republican Party has just a 3-seat majority, which means they have 218 seats compared with the Democrats who have 215 seats. And in the Senate, which is the upper chamber, where there are 100 members, the Republican Party has 53 members and the Democrats have 47. What this means is Trump and the Republican Party have a fairly slim majority in the House and a vulnerable majority in the Senate. And the congressional elections happen every 2 years. And so the next election for members of Congress is due in November 2026, when the entire House of Representatives, which is the lower house of 435 members, goes up for an election. And then the senators, every 6 years, 1/3 goes into an election. So 33 senators are up for a re-election in November 2026. Now, of those 33 senators, 20 of them are Republican senators, and many of them are obviously very interested in winning back and getting re-elected. And so they are very likely to make sure that whatever Trump is doing in terms of tariffs or actions elsewhere doesn't cause pain to their voters. But at the same time, of course, how this all plays out also depends on the Democratic opposition party and what it is able to convince voters on these issues. So these are pressure points that are not lost on other countries. For example, Trump has imposed tariffs on China, and China has, retaliated by imposing tariffs on American goods. But if you see what China has done, it has imposed those retaliatory tariffs primarily on areas which are likely to hurt Trump voters and Republican Party politicians. So the Washington think tank called Brookings recently wrote that the most intensely affected counties that would suffer from China's retaliatory tariffs are, in their quote, in the areas of energy manufacturing communities in states like North Dakota, Indiana, Ohio, Kentucky, Alabama, and West Virginia. And the think tank said that these tariffs will hurt Trump voting counties the most. Now, also, in addition to these tariffs, Trump has also threatened to roll back incentives provided by the Biden administration for electric vehicles manufacture. And that is already causing panic in the auto industry. The Ford CEO just recently said that if these incentives are ended, it will result in factory closures and job losses. So you can see that a lot of Trump's actions could actually worsen unemployment, inflation, and other factors for many of his key voters and constituents. In a normal political situation, these dynamics would be disastrous for outcome for any political party, especially when there's an election in just less than 2 years. But one of the odd things about American politics is the Republican Party has, over the decades, mastered the art of distracting voters with all manner of issues, even as the party's policies make life worse for the voters. And, there's an old saying in politics, which is true everywhere in the world, which is that politics, there are only two buttons to push. One is hope, and the other is fear. Now, Republicans have become experts in pushing the button called fear. And they have basically, created monsters out of immigrants, always pointed to all sorts of foreign threats, targeted non-Christians, and even gay and lesbian people, primarily to distract voters from the fact that whatever policies the Republicans are pursuing are actually hurting the voters. But voters are only one constituency the Republican Party has. The other big one is all the companies and ultra-wealthy class of donors whom you see around Donald Trump. So the other big internal political thing that is going to happen in the next few weeks is the Republicans in Congress, which is the national legislative body, have to pass a budget for 2025, which is already 5 months late because the American financial year starts in October. So they have a deadline by March 14, they have to pass a budget. But they also want to pass a bill that will extend tax cuts that Trump passed in 2017. Now, those tax cuts were one of the largest, biggest overhaul of the US tax code since 1986. So now if those tax cuts are extended, nearly half the benefits will flow to households that are in the top 5% of the earning capacity in the country, according to tax experts. But that actually sets up a lot of conflict and contradiction within the factions of the Republican Party, because there's a big group of people who are opposed to any increase in the national debt. Now, the US debt is right now about $36 trillion, and there's already an intra-party fighting going on about how to achieve the goal of extending tax cuts without raising debt. And if you want to do that, obviously you have to cut the spending programs, and that could affect poor voters who are getting some of these government-funded programs. Then there are factions within the Republican Party that want to spend more on defense, which is already $900 billion a year. And now Trump has said that he wants to use military force to take back Panama Canal, he wants to invade and occupy Greenland, and he even used military force to maybe take Gaza by force. And presumably, if these are real plans, they would require a lot more defense spending. So you can see there's a lot of spending, a lot of cuts in the revenue, and debt is going to increase. And so they can't make all of this work and balance each other without really having an internal fight about how to do this. To make matters worse, they're actually inventing more and more new threats. For example, just last week, Trump classified several Mexican drug cartels as foreign terrorist organizations. What that designation means is US could potentially send military forces into Mexico to combat these gangs, creating yet another war. But there are also people within the Republican Party who are isolationists, who want nothing to do with the rest of the world, and they want to be left alone. So these are all people who are going to be fighting among themselves. But if the Democratic Party, which is the opposition, if they all stick together, then it's going to be probably very difficult for Trump to get all of this agenda passed without any Democratic support. But that could possibly lead to a shutdown of the US government, which happens from time to time. The last time this happened was under Trump's watch, where the US government literally, quote unquote, shut down for 35 days. So now Trump has also signed on an order on reciprocal tariffs, which will apparently impose identical rates on goods that other countries charge for US goods. And it's still unclear how this would work in practice, because a single item could have multiple tariff rates depending on where they are coming from. And all of this also could mean it will push up prices, further exacerbate inflation, and create huge problems for Republican candidates in next year's election. So there is all of this fighting going on, and how these contradictions are going to be resolved remain to be seen, and could become clearer in the months to come. So there are two key elections that are coming up actually this year, which might give people a sense of whether Trump's policies are going to last or not. So two states are electing governors this year in November 2025. One is the state of Virginia, and the other is the state of New Jersey. And Virginia is a really hotly contested state because it keeps swinging between Republican and Democratic candidates, and right now the governor is a Republican, and there's a very strong contender for that seat from the Democratic Party. So if either or both states swing to becoming a democratically elected governor, so that could mean that voters are unhappy with what Trump is doing. So what does all of this mean for India and the world? Generally speaking, Americans generally have, for the most part, have very little interest in foreign policy. I mean, lots of studies over the years have shown the average American can't spot many of the countries in the world on a map. Even when I was in graduate school in the United States in the mid-1990s, if you showed people a map of Africa and asked them, okay, tell me where Nigeria is, no one can spot where Nigeria is, or any of the big countries on the map. So, but immigration, which is generally considered under the umbrella of foreign policy, is the one item that has a lot of interest and importance for American citizens. So that explains Trump's constant drumbeat about undocumented immigrants and the threats they pose, which is actually not true. So while the Trump administration has said they will do mass deportations, the total number of undocumented immigrants in the country is about 11 million. And so right now what the Trump administration is doing is basically they are arresting about 1,000 people roughly on a daily basis. And one of the Pew Research Center, which is a think tank again, has said at this rate it will take 17 years to arrest and deport all 11 million undocumented immigrants. In fact, Barack Obama, when he was president, deported more undocumented immigrants than any president before or since. In fact, he was called deporter-in-chief. So on other foreign policy issues like the Russia-Ukraine war, Israel-Hamas conflict, or the threat of China, are mostly issues that only have interest, there's only interest in that among a fairly small group of foreign policy experts and people in Washington than the average American voter. Now, as all of you know, Prime Minister Modi is in Washington, and after his White House meeting, Trump said that India would buy, quote, many billions of dollars of US-made weapons. And as we were talking, Marshal Matheswaran was saying how, one of the things that has been mentioned is India will buy these very advanced fighter jets called F-35. And there is a lot of friction about how India does not want to just simply buy American or foreign weapons, but wants to manufacture them in India. And generally, the United States does not allow technology transfer and only wants to sell, advanced weapons with what is called black box, so nothing can be opened and manufactured. And America also has a very intrusive inspection regime, which is they send inspectors from time to time to any country that's buying its weapons to ensure that the weapons are still in that pristine condition. And India in the past has said that that actually violates Indian sovereignty. And Modi and Trump also said during the press conference that they had agreed to collaborate on developing semiconductors, quantum technology, and artificial intelligence. And I've actually done some reporting on this, but these things have already been in play for several years. And so these collaboration on all of these tech areas is something that I don't think is a brand new development. And global alliances, so what happens to the rest of the world? Kumar mentioned the US withdrawing from the Paris Accord and WHO. So the global alliances in the post-World War II structure has been crumbling for quite a while, and looks like Trump is going to potentially deliver a death blow. And Trump's Vice President, J.D. Vance, has said that Ukraine cannot expect to get its 2014 borders back, which means Russia basically is able to take and keep territory in flagrant violation of global norms. And Trump repeatedly in the past and even now has been seen to capitulate to Vladimir Putin, whom he admires. Famously during the first term, if some of you may remember, that at a press conference in Helsinki, Trump said that he believed Putin rather than the US intelligence agencies. So there's been a lot of writing and thinking about why Trump is acting this way. And there's a historian in the United States called Timothy Snyder who has written that Trump is basically a weak, strong man. In other words, a sheep in wolf's clothing rather than a wolf in sheep's clothing. So he pretends to act tough, but he's actually somebody who capitulates to other strong men. What this means for the rest of the world is if the US says it can take Panama Canal and Greenland by force and clear out Gaza by force, and Trump accepts Putin's demand for Ukrainian territory, then the United States is no longer in a position to object to, say, China or any other country taking, say, Taiwan by force, for example. Or any other, for that matter, any powerful country can threaten and take its weak neighbors. So how bad can it get? Actually, I think things could get a lot worse, domestically at first, and then spiral out to the rest of the world. So far, when I mentioned several of Trump's executive orders, they have all been paused or halted by federal courts in the United States. But just recently, J.D. Vance has said that courts should not have the power to stop the legitimate exercise of authority by the president. What does that mean? So it basically means they are laying the ground, Trump, Vance, and others, they are laying the groundwork to say that Trump can ignore court orders. So if Congress, as I mentioned, is not acting as a check on Trump, and if courts' orders can be ignored, then there emerges a situation where the whole system of government with Congress and the president and the courts that were all created by the US Constitution to be equally powerful and check each other would collapse. So the question remains, do Americans support this widespread destruction of domestic and global institutions and norms? And if so, why? So I'll just briefly mention there is a long history for why there is this rage and anger that Trump represents on the global stage. And I'm sure many of you travel to the United States either for business or pleasure, and some of you may be familiar with these broad themes and shifts in American society over the last several decades. But I'll just mention a few broad things. There's just vast income inequality in the United States. The top 5% own 2/3 of the national wealth. The per capita GDP is $82,000, but what that inequality translates into is, things that don't make the headlines. For example, there's 12% of urban residents live in poverty. A shocking 30% of rural black people live in poverty, and poverty is $15,000 a year. There are some counties in the state of Georgia, for example, in the south, that don't have a maternal healthcare physician for miles, that forces women to drive nearly 100 miles or so to find a doctor. And there are towns in Alabama where raw sewage bubbles up in black people's backyards. And in Detroit, a lot of you may have seen, has been suffering from lead poisoning in poor people's homes. And a lot of this is because over the years from the 1970s and 80s onwards, free trade, market-based capitalism, a lot of the biggest American companies moved out of the United States and just turned those cities into just empty shells. And in fact, there's the phrase that's often used is Rust Belt. All the cities in the Midwest, which used to be industrial towns, the factories are now basically rusting. And this has happened not just in big manufacturing, but also in other electronic sectors. So the people have lost jobs, people have left their towns, and there's a sense of, the loss of jobs, and people have also have this sense of a lack of ownership and, importance that they had when they had important jobs to do. And this is primarily affecting blue-collar workers and working-class people. So this has actually led to a significant decline in life expectancy because of overdose of drug deaths, because of suicides from gunshot violence, and lack of access to healthcare and so forth. But while all of this is happening to, small-town America, there's also been America's disastrous wars in the aftermath of 9/11. So in Afghanistan and Iraq combined, America spent $5.2 trillion and lost thousands of American soldiers, and tens of thousands of American soldiers have come back seriously wounded, and that will cost several hundreds of billions of dollars to treat over the lifetime. But both wars ended in a disaster. America did not win these wars. And as a result, nobody got punished. None of the generals, they all lied. In fact, there's an extensive record of generals in private conversations telling that, they are losing the war in Afghanistan, but in public saying that everything is going well. So none of them got punished. And on the civilian side of things, a lot of you know about the 2008 financial crisis, where Americans lost $13 trillion in wealth. 1 in 4 American families lost at least 75% of their wealth because of that financial crash. No, nobody in the Wall Street and financial community who devised and sold worthless mortgage-backed securities was ever punished for this. So there's a lot of anger and resentment that the average American voter feels that he or she is being left behind while the well-educated, wealthy, especially people along the coasts, including a lot of immigrants, are continuing to prosper because of gains in the stock market. And this has been also exacerbated or made worse by advances in technology like social media. But I think this may be a point of contention, but there is also, alongside all of these economic facts, there is an unmistakable aspect of racism, leading to anti-immigrant sentiments, resentment that non-whites, black people, brown people, including well-educated immigrants, are doing extremely well, leading many, I think, to conclude that success for these people is coming at the cost of white Native Americans. In fact, there's a lot of research that shows Barack Obama's rise to presidency may have jolted several segments of white Americans to worry that their power was eroding. And in fact, a lot of population projections now say that in about 10 years' time, white people might become a minority in the United States. And if you remember, Trump also stoked fears that Obama wasn't really even a real American and falsely claimed for several years that Obama was born in Kenya. There's a former American president, Lyndon Johnson, once said, explaining the racism that's inherent in America, quote, "If you can convince the lowest white man he's better than the best colored man, he, the white man, won't notice you're picking his pocket. Hell, give him somebody to look down on, and the white man will empty his own pockets for you." And I think some of that sentiment still runs through pockets of American society. Now, recently, Trump has appointed a man called Darren Beattie, who is his former Trump speechwriter, has been appointed to become the Secretary of Public Diplomacy at the United States State Department, which is the Foreign Ministry. And Beattie wrote last year that, quote, "competent white men must be in charge if you want things to work." Clearly, David Beattie is ignoring the fact that the failures of Vietnam, Afghanistan, Iraq, 2008 financial meltdown, all the trade deals that moved all the jobs and ruined American cities were all overseen, executed by competent white men. Thank you for your patience. I'll take your questions.
Thank you, Gopal. I don't know if it frightened the daylights out of you. It certainly did. I was certainly hoping to listen to something a little more uplifting, but this is the world that we live in. Therefore, we have to just accept what reality is and see what best we can do to deal with this reality. See what we can do to better our economies and our lives and our investments. So again, Gopal, thanks very much. This is really not what we see on television. So this is great insight. It comes from living there and covering the White House and so forth. So really, that's really useful. So we can take some questions, but before that, Air Marshal, if you would like to start off, and then we can collect some questions from the audience.
Yeah. Well, I think, thanks Gopal for that excellent coverage. What you said in the last part is actually the most important, information, which is about the inequality that exists in the US. And if you go into the central part of the country, you can actually see that in quite stark, reality. And US is a very big geographical, domain. It's 3 times India's size, and the population is just 300 million. We have 1.4 trillion. I mean, 1.4, trillion, that's right. So you can see how vast and extensive is there, and these guys are fighting against immigrants. And then the disparity in living standards between the increasingly very affluent people like Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk is extremely stark, and that's creating a social division. Trump has exploited this for the votes, but this can be sowing the seeds for a larger violence, correct? And the racial issues that are emerging are actually misplaced because Trump has fooled them. That's one of the most important issues. But what I would like to bring out, taking this part, is that the US has been the hegemon since 1945. And if you go through, if any of you have read Paul Kennedy's Rise and Fall of Great Powers, every hegemon comes to this stage. Because once you've climbed on the tiger and you're ruling the world, you can't get off the tiger. And you have to keep extending yourself. You do things like creating the petrodollar, creating dollars, the reserve currency, and you're overextending yourself. There comes a point, what Paul Kennedy calls is the imbalance between your economic strength and your ability to maintain yourself as the hegemon of the world comes to a breaking point. The US maintains 902 military bases across the world. Its expense on military or defense and security, including homeland security and defense, is $1.6 trillion a year. Okay? And to sustain that, it has to carry on printing dollar because rest of the world buys a dollar. In fact, rest of the world pays for the US's security and to keep the US as the hegemon of the world. But this is now being threatened thanks to these two events, Ukraine and Gaza. And the breaking of the world into vertically into two, sides, with China and Russia on one side. And now much of the global south has realized that US's dollar have weaponized the dollar, and through sanctions, US is no more seen as a trustworthy, a global hegemon who would guarantee the public goods and safety of the world. So this is the reality. So you find that much of the continuity between various administrations is a deep state that does this part, and you will find most well-known economists like Michael Hudson or even journalists like Chris Hedges, they all say that the Trump is, I would say, more of histrionics, but the deep state controls everything. It doesn't really make much of a difference. And this extension of retaining, this overextension to retain their hegemony will continue to undo what the US is trying to retain. The only answer for that is to rationalize with the rest of the world and bring in and accept the reality of an emerging multipolar world, which means the economic system needs to change. So all the threats that Trump has been giving, for example, against the BRICS, threatening them that you de-dollarize, I'll come like a ton of bricks on you. Even if he tries to do, it may not be possible for him to do that. So with $36 trillion of domestic debt, the dollar was 75% of the world's holdings in 2001. Today it's 59%. And it's declining quite rapidly. So what would be the future with respect to, over the next 3 years, will the histrionics continue, or will he change, or will the deep state change anything?
I think I mentioned it. Can Trump be stopped or at least slowed down really depends on, I think, how the domestic politics plays out. If, for example, he continues in the same manner, doing things without regard to his own party's people, right? And let's say, for example, the Republicans lose one or both chambers of Congress in the 2026 election, then pretty much Trump can be stopped in the last 2 years of his presidency. So that remains to be seen. So that is one check. Now, people are also saying all kinds of wild things. Trump will never leave and he will cancel elections. Those are all things that could potentially happen. And if things like that happen, then, all bets are off.
Yeah.
Right? And so then there could only be possibly widespread violence and so on and so forth. But between now and the 2-year mark when, that break can be applied on Trump, I just still feel that there's a lot that could potentially go wrong between now and then.
But he's a businessman essentially, and he's now having got, like you said, in the inaugural ceremony, all the oligarchs around him with Elon Musk and the others, including our Sundar Pichai. So have they taken virtually the control? You see Elon Musk literally running amok.
Yeah, Elon Musk has been given a free access. So, right, in Washington, the White House, and right next to that is called the Executive Office of the President. It's a big, huge building. Apparently, he has an entire office to himself there, and the two things are just connected by a very small passage. And I'm reading that Elon Musk is sleeping in his office and then walking into the White House as and when he wants. So, and, the other thing that has happened is, people like Elon Musk and some of his very young assistants have all been given high security clearances without a proper vetting. So I think as far as the other tech people are concerned, Zuckerberg, Sundar Pichai, Jeff Bezos and others, they don't want really any role in the American government. They just simply want to be left alone to make money. And, basically that's what Trump has done. He has, for example, the Federal Trade Commission, which enforces the antitrust monopoly, issues in the United States. the previous person in charge of the agency was a Pakistani American woman called Lina Khan, and she has been fired. So they've put a very pro-business person in charge of that agency, which means all these guys will be free to buy and sell whatever they want with no questions asked. So that's what they want. But Elon Musk seems to definitely have a very different agenda. And I think at some point in the next few months, there's going to be a big clash between him and Trump. And hopefully we all pray that Musk gets kicked out of the White House.
Yeah, in fact, some of his first tenure advisors have vowed that we will get Elon Musk out in a short time. But notwithstanding that, there are a couple of things. One issue that on the economics that I want to raise. China seems to have prepared itself very well, looking for Trump's return. And therefore, what they've done, while they did not react as efficiently and as intelligently as they're doing now with, response in terms of tariffs, they have expanded their economic leverage in the rest of the world. So the exposure to the US in terms of percentage of their GDP is only 2.8%. So any of the tariff increases that he threatens could boomerang on the American economy and the American people themselves. That's one. And China has already captured the influence on the rest of the global south and rest of the world. So this is what probably you can see a little bit of downsizing in Trump's rhetoric over the last 3 weeks. Will that change even more?
I think as far as China is concerned, it's, I think, a ploy on the part of Trump to appear like a strong man in front of China and Russia. But if China were to even make a small indication that they are willing to work with him, he will just, drop all his pretense. Yeah. Because he really admires somebody like a Xi Jinping. Because in the past he has very admiringly said how Xi Jinping keeps a country of 1.5 billion people under his thumb. And he wants that same kind of control for himself. So and to your other point, China's prepared well. I think China is one of the countries that has an extremely long-term vision for how to execute a strategy. And unfortunately, I think the United States, the capacity to have a strategic thinking and planning in the long term is gone, is really eroded, whether it's in national security or domestic politics, because every 4 years brings this huge churn where thousands of officials leave the government and new people come and, everything is changed. So this is a problem. Yeah.
It's a good segue for me to ask you a question from two ladies. I thought I'd start questions from ladies first. There are very few of them in the room. Both of them pertain to China. With the increasing competition and the focus on China, will China still go ahead and, do what everybody fears they will do with reference to Taiwan? That's part one. The second lady asked, in that context, what will be the role of India in the Indo-Pacific? Will India become a closer partner to the United States as compared to what we are today?
Really interesting question. So, the biggest fear in Washington until a month ago, everybody is convinced that by 2027, Xi Jinping will somehow move and take Taiwan in some fashion. And so, the entire national security, foreign policy, military apparatus of the United States has been planning and thinking and working on that. Now, I actually, personally, I don't believe the United States will really put its blood and treasure to save Taiwan. I don't think so, because so they may try to. I think the United States strategy is to raise the cost for China by investing in weapons and ships and systems, so that China will think twice about taking Taiwan by force. But I don't believe that the United States will militarily intervene to physically stop, because one can imagine the actual cost in terms of the number of people dead and ships lost and so forth will be huge. And if, to the other point, if Trump says, okay, there's an old, thing in the United States history called the Monroe Doctrine, postulated by an American president, which says all the, countries and regions in the American continent, including North and South, should be under the, control of the United States. So basically now, Trump is reviving that mindset. Then there is really no sort of a place for the United States to oppose China from taking Taiwan in that case. So I think it actually makes it potentially more likely that China will attempt to do something in Taiwan once they assess, how weak or strong Trump is and how he is likely to react. And the second question was, what can India do? What will it do to the Indo-Pacific? The previous Biden administration created this grouping called the Quad, which is Japan, Australia, India, and I believe South Korea, right? US, yeah, sorry. Which I think that is still very much in place. And so potentially in a traditional American administration, that would be strengthened in the case of a conflict or a military activity in Taiwan. But generally speaking, Air Marshal can speak more to the Indian strategic thinking than I can. But India has always expressed, when I covered the US-India defense and national security affairs, India has never wanted to be, the Americans are always asking why India will not be a treaty partner. This is a constant question every newbie in a Washington foreign policy circles asks. But India has never wanted to be a treaty partner with anyone, because the old saying in Washington was, India will ride the bus with you for as long as it wants and then get off and do its own thing. So India actually always wants to keep a strategic flexibility and independence. So even though the Quad is sort of like a grouping, I don't think India will ever be driven into a treaty situation. So if, for example, China were to militarily take Taiwan, then I think India will really seriously reassess its own border conflicts and others with China.
If I just want to add that in the first analysis, I agree with you. In my analysis, China will not attack Taiwan. Why would they attack? Because Taiwan's biggest export partner, the maximum Taiwan exports to the country is China. That's one. Majority of the population have relations in mainland China. And they, despite all the other issues, they still have connections and they still work in business. That's one. Second, as long as Taiwan does not declare independence, the mainland China will not attack Taiwan. And it is probably, it's a power transition theory that the declining hegemon now wants to fight it out. It could only be the US who can create a situation where a conflict could come. Okay, but that would be dangerous for the US as we go along. In the Indo-Pacific, you're right. India will never be an alliance and treaty partner with anyone. Despite that, the US wants to pull India into that. It's tried its best. This is the question we constantly keep getting it, but it's not going to happen. And that's the reason US, UK, and Australia set up the AUKUS, which is nothing but a pure security defense alliance like the NATO against China. That's
it. Just to add to that, so if on the one hand the United States is weakening all the global alliances, then the question is what about all these new alliances? Will they be strengthened? Will they be let to languish? So those are all questions still unanswered.
Well, again, when you discuss on this, yes, Trump is a maverick who's actually pretty much destroying all the alliances. But the NATO's even during Biden's time with the Ukraine war, they've almost made it as a handmaiden of the US, and Europe has been pretty much destroyed. So what you're actually seeing is where it suits them, they will talk about an alliance for that convenience. But US is behaving exactly as how the independent powers behaved in the League of Nations. And the League of Nations led to a world war. We are pretty much in the same situation. The US does not accept itself as subject to the International Court of Justice or the ICC. Trump has made a statement, I will sanction those judges who declared Netanyahu as a war criminal. The whole world agrees he was a war criminal. And so this is pushing towards finally saying, they walked out of WHO, they're walking out, and they walked out of the climate control. Finally, they are saying, okay, dismantle the UN. This is probably a new world order will come, a new setup will come, but before all that, a lot of violence probably will happen.
Group Captain, there are a bunch of really good questions. I'm also conscious that we are 15 minutes? Okay, 7:30. So I think the next question is for you, Air Marshal. With Trump offering advanced fighter jets, I'm not very sure if he's actually offering, but this is something that has been up in the air. And emphasizing on defense, how should India navigate its strategies on defense partnership with both the United States and other nations like Russia while safeguarding the strategic autonomy?
Very interesting. And he's made that statement, a general statement that we are going to sell billions of dollars of military equipment to India, including F-35. Now, he's not quantified as to when, what, and how firm is the F-35 is on offer. So it's a very ambiguous statement, one. But the US wants to pull us away from Russian access to Russian weapons. They've been trying this, they are trying this continuously since 15 years, 20 years now. The reason is that's one of the ways in which they can lock us, even if you're not a treaty partner, into an alliance like the Quad, and then coerce you because they will increase your dependency. So this is the larger purpose. Between 2007 and now, we've already given the US military industrial complex a business of about $24 billion. That's the highest we've given in this time frame, shorter time frame. All right, and all of them are off-the-shelf buys. Okay, fine, we bought C-17 good aircraft, C-130 helicopters, we bought the ships, we bought the Boeing P-8Is. So all that cannot be manufactured here, that is okay. But now when it comes to fighters, it's a very tricky game. So if F-35 is being offered, they've already mentioned the conditionalities. We would want to know in which base each aircraft is located, who's flying it, where it will fly. That means you lost your sovereignty. The US will have complete strategic knowledge of how you're operating your system. No country is going to accept that. Maybe because Japan and Germany are defeated parties and tied down by an alliance, they have to live that way. They don't know, they don't have an option. But India doesn't have to. And second, India has always made a very delicate balancing act since independence, in not even wanting to depend excessively on the Russians. We've reduced the dependency on Russian systems from almost 70-80%. Today it's about 41%. So we've diversified to European countries, to Central European countries, to the US, but we don't want to get locked into the US. But suppose, let's say, the US says, okay, fine, we want to have a very strong strategic partnership. We'll open out the technology domain to you. We will set up the complete manufacturing of F-35 in India. Maybe that could change some mindsets. But still, you have to remember Kissinger's words. It's bad to be USA's enemy, but it is very fatal to be USA's friend. Okay, so that's what you need to remember.
I think both of you are competing to depress everybody here in this room. So, Gopal, this is for you. It's on bilateral trade from two members of the audience. One is, there is a promise of this $500 billion bilateral trade by 2030, I think. What are the key sectors that India should focus on? That's item number one. And the second question that has come is, Trump has spoken about exporting oil and gas to India. And on the other hand, we also speak about greening of the energy supply chain. Will, in fact, US help India in that energy transition? And when you're addressing this, maybe would you like to touch on what happens to the tech trade with the United States? I think they have taken a 6-month time for figuring out what they want to do with AI or something of that sort. Yeah.
So maybe I can talk about that AI thing first. So when ChatGPT came on the scene, there was an utter panic in Washington. And So then the Biden administration and members of Congress held series of discussions with all the tech people, trying to understand what the ramifications are, what the dangers are, and what the opportunities are. Now, in typical American fashion, they did not want to, pass any regulations, but waited to see how things will emerge. In the meantime, as many of you know, the European Union has passed what is called the EU AI Act, which has very strict controls on what areas the AI systems can be used, ranking them according to their risk. But Biden people on their own basically issued a set of guidelines, and there is a institution in the United States called the National Institutes of Standards and Technology. They created something called the AI Safety Institute, primarily to have, models like ChatGPT and others tested, voluntarily tested, to see if these are capable of, for example, helping some terror group or somebody create chemical weapons and biological weapons and so on. So when Trump came, he basically removed and canceled all of those efforts. Now he has put a venture capitalist in charge of the AI policy, and now they are saying it will take 6 months for them to come up with a new AI policy, which they are saying will be free and will not shackle industry and so on. But as anyone who works in technology knows, AI companies are not going to stop for the 6 months until this policy is issued. So they are now in a place where the previous controls and regulations are not in place, the new ones are not in place, so they are in a free-for-all situation. And I know that a lot of American companies that have bases in the US and internationally are worried about how to comply with EU law and then what will happen in the American situation. That's sort of a lot of uncertainty about what will happen. In terms of the trade areas, I think one of the things that I've really not seen a lot done, but India being a huge, has a fairly significant, robust pharmaceutical sector, there is a lot of consternation and fear in the United States that pharma and bio products or components of pharma and bio products that come from China could be tainted or dangerous. In fact, there is an effort in the US Congress to actually pass laws. There's a particular law called Biosecure Act, which will ban the importation of some of these ingredients into the United States. So there may be actually a big opportunity for Indian companies in pharma and broadly the biotechnology sector, which is also now called synthetic biology. So maybe there might be actually big opportunities there, because that's actually attracting a lot of investment, maybe not on the same scale as AI, but significant investments as well. What is the other question? You had one more?
The green energy.
See, green energy now, if Trump is opposed to all forms of green energy and he wants to go back to drilling oil and shale gas and all of that, so it's a question of what do we do? There is legislation which is probably pumping $700-800 billion into greening of America's energy systems. But, the Republicans in Congress and Trump are trying their very best to stop all of these programs. So if all of these are halted halfway through, then I don't know how, the US can provide technological help to other countries to actually do the greening of their energy system.
In fact, I'm sure you'll agree with me, if the American economy today can be said to depend on just 4 sectors: the military-industrial complex, oil and gas, big tech, and pharma. Right? Now, if he is going to now undo all the green issues, if the American Constitution is strong, the democracy is pretty strong, so I don't think he'll be able to overturn any of that process. That is one of the vibrant strengths of the American economy. So people probably will wait out for him to finish and move, and the green things will come back again. And I think it makes sense for India to remain on track with respect to, as a country that's dependent on fossil fuel, it makes sense for us to remain on track to get away from the fossil fuel dependency, right? So we don't have to import just because Trump wants us to import fossil fuel.
Marshal, there are a couple of very specific questions. One is Rana's extradition. What more can we do to achieve that? And is there anything else that we can do to cooperate better with the United States and counter terrorism?
It's taken so many years. I was the Air Force commander in Bombay on that night. And so we've seen what happened. And this guy should have been extradited at least a decade ago. But notwithstanding that, I heard the news this morning. And I think this is one of the best decisions Trump has given. Let the guy come, let's deal with it. It sets a precedent. It sets a precedent. That's actually the most important outcome. Not that it will solve everything immediately, but it sets a precedent, and so that subsequent presidents who follow Trump cannot, deny, if somebody is working against Indian interests. And I think Prime Minister has already made the statement about Khalistan, and probably they will have to listen on some of these areas.
Great. You must have seen me putting down these sheets of paper. It's simply because, the questions are really relevant, but they have been covered in some shape or form by the two experts. So I just didn't want to, go back, in a sort of a numerical manner. I think we have two last questions, both for Gopal. One, Biden claims he has left behind a very strong United States economy. And Trump says, what is it called? Lazy Biden or something like that? Sleepy Biden. Sleepy Biden, Sleepy Joe. So, which one is true? I mean, has he left behind a strong economy or has he left behind a lot of muck?
Well, as a basic starting point, one should say that anything Trump says is complete BS. He has made a complete life and professional career out of just lying. It is true that actually Trump, if I think in 20 years history were written, Biden will probably be one of the most consequential presidents. Because in terms of policies that address the needs of Americans, Biden probably did a lot more than any president in recent memory. Overall, he helped pass like 3 significant pieces of legislation that put nearly, I think, $4 trillion into the American economy. One was the greening initiative. One was the infrastructure initiative. And Trump, in the first term, kept talking about an infrastructure plan every week, but he did not do a single thing on infrastructure. And Biden actually got that done in the first 2 years. So the biggest problem with the Democrats, and my wife is here, so we've actually been talking to a few Democratic candidates. The biggest problem for Democrats is they do a lot of very good policies, but they are terrible in actually telling the story of what they are doing. And in fact, Biden himself on his way out said that he spent too much time on policies and not enough time on politics. Like, for example, a key thing. In the first term, Trump, when COVID hit and all Americans got a check from the president as an incentive during the COVID shutdown, Trump signed every one of those checks himself. Although normally the US Treasury, some secretary will sign it and send it, Trump insisted he sign it. So a lot of Americans actually took selfies with the check saying, hey, Donald Trump sent me a check. When Biden came, he also issued incentive checks, but, somebody who didn't pay attention to the politics of it, he just let some officials sign it and sent it, and you got no benefit of actually having sent money to people. So, in terms of actual policies, I think Biden accomplished a lot, but never managed to actually tell a story of what they achieved. And of course, if you leave, it's like in football, you leave the goal unattended, somebody is going to just kick the ball in. So that's what Trump is doing.
The last question, yes or no question. Will Trump make America great again?
Oh, man. Trump
This is serious. This is actually written down on this piece of paper. So,
No, it all depends, I think, on what great means. And I think I alluded to some of this. His idea and his people's idea of greatness is a country of entirely white people, somewhere in the 1800s, conquering frontier towns and chasing Native Americans out of their land and so on. And so that's kind of like the mythical idea he's alluding to, but I don't think that's ever going to come to fruition.
Never, absolutely. But you could comment what will be the shape of foreign policy that the administration will take. That's one. And second is Trump really in charge or the deep state continues to be in charge?
I don't. I think. See, the nomenclature "deep state" itself is a fairly sort of an offensive thing because I don't think there's a real deep state. Yes, are there intelligence agencies, spy agencies that have secrets? Yes, it's there in every major country. They do keep secrets that not everybody knows, but because that's how complex societies work. But to take every bureaucrat in the office and every FBI agent and every prosecutor and call him or her a deep state agent, it's just, I think, terrible. But now we are going to see they are trying to like kick out some 5,000 FBI agents, remove all attorneys. And actually, for me, one of the biggest things, if I were a betting man, I would be very, very worried that in about 2 to 3 years, United States may actually suffer a pretty catastrophic attack because they are weakening so much of the intelligence apparatus and law enforcement apparatus, and there are a lot of domestic terrorists in the United States. People forget it's not just somebody coming from somewhere and blowing things up. America has a history of domestic terrorism. People forget there's somebody called Timothy McVeigh who blew up a government building because people told him government was evil. So all of those things are actually very troubling to just be called deep state and remove all of them from power.
It's very tempting to keep going on. It's a fascinating discussion, but Group Captain has already stood up, which is a cue for us to wind down things. It's been a fascinating discussion. I only wish it was a little more positive. A big round of applause. Air Marshal, thank you very much. And let me hand it back to you, Group Captain.
Thank you, Mr. Kumar. We got more than 680 viewers watching. That's why so many questions come. I kept about 20 questions there. I sent you the balance. But I'm so happy that though the numbers are less here, there's so much of interest in this topic. And not only that, when you get back home, next 2-3 days, we'll keep seeing this in the television. Maybe you'll also think, yeah, it's going to pass one day. It doesn't matter. Ladies and gentlemen, big round of applause to the panel, Air Marshal, Gopal and Kumar, for making great insights on what's happening. And may I request Senior Vice President Lakshmi Narayan to please do us the honor of presenting. Sundaram, can you also join us on stage, please? We do a lot of CSR work with the poor school children. It's all done by the poor school children under our CSR work. This is what we're going to present to you. Also the book. Come, sir. Attending the Never Trump movement.
What is that?
Yeah, Never Trump.